All right, we're working on my new ranking part two. Uh, so last time I talked about methodology, not going to talk about that much again, except briefly at one point. But I like this methodology. I think it's a good way to adjust for length of peak versus longer peaks for shorter peaks. And you can sort of divide up a player's careers into a bunch of peaks and not pay so much attention to like, hey, they went 0 and 1 for a couple years in every tournament, and then they came back really strong. Like, does the 0 and 1 mean that much? Maybe not compared to what the peaks did. But of course, those 0 and 1s cut off the peak. So if they had extended it longer, it would look even better. You know, that kind of thing. All right. So we're going to talk about 06 to 08 today. Last time we talked about 03 to 06. I should make sure everything is recording properly. Looks good. All right. And first, I want to talk a little about comparisons because here were the five best players of 03 to 06. And you see here listed their career average by this method, their first peak, and their second peak. And I listed the peaks in order. So P1 is not necessarily the higher peak. And what I want to say is, I think looking at this, as good as Karmazin's run was, I just have to think Kamikaze and Sujiro are ahead of him. I think I just have to. They both have a peak that's better, and they clearly lasted longer at a really high level. Um, And okay, my inclination is to put them ahead, but I've at times put them behind. And I think it's pretty clear. And this is not the entirety of Kamikaze or Sujiro's career, though it's close. Um, and I think for that matter, especially once you consider that Cookie was doing it earlier, and that first peak is in 2004 when ratings are have not yet reached what they should be, and you're not yet getting quite enough credit for beating the players you're beating. I think if they're ahead, Cookie has to be too, right? Cookie has these two peaks, and no one else has had two peaks near as good as Cookie's two peaks, right? I think all the others have a their best peak is probably a little higher than his, but Cookie has these two separate ones. And even Sujiro, who has a really nice run that I'm separating from his championship and runs around that, even him it's not close. So the other thing I want to say, and we're going to talk about this a little later, is the one person I think the system really underrates is Doc Evil. There's a case for Karma as well, but I think it's basically just Doc Evil. So I would have Doc Evil number one. But then it's pretty close. Like Kamikaze and Sujiro are very similar at this point in time. Again, this is through 2006. They each have one championship. They each have one really dominant run with really good runs around it. You can see their second peaks are really similar. Sujiro a little better on the first peak, but Kamikaze better between peaks, leading to the overall higher career. You can see why I've often said they're much closer than I think many rating systems have given, and Sujiro is kind of underrated as one of the all-time greats. Kamikaze is usually put there, but Sujiro is not always. And Cookie is usually put there. And then you compare Cookie to either of those, and those three are really close to me, for me. Maybe Cookie should be ahead. I think the peak one and peak two matter more than the career number. I think the career number is not as meaningful. The point of this was to do something and really consider players by the different time periods they were great. Again, I think Cookie's peak one is underrated here. So if you jumped peak one up to like 2200, you said it was 2200 and 2190. You know, obviously that adds up to more than both Sujiro and Kazi's peaks, but adding up to more isn't necessarily better. Like each additional point I think is worth more than the last the further you get from, 2000 or 2100. Each point is pushing you further into this is like the all-time great run. Um so averaging the peaks I think is probably not the way I'd approach it. But I think Cookie, Kamikaze, and Sujiro, I think the standard rating is Cookie, then Kamikaze, then Sujiro. And historically, I've tended to rank them Kamikaze, then Sujiro, then Cookie. I think in 2006, Cookie number one of them is probably right. So looking at this, I'd probably go Doc Evil 1, Cookie 2, Kamikaze and Sujiro in either order 3 and 4, and Karmazin in 5th. But I asked last time how you would rank them, and I'm curious if you land in a similar space. Um, Obviously, all of these, the five greatest players of the era, and really tremendous careers. All right. So, can we get to the new '06 to '08 stats? I wanted to include one thing I thought was interesting, which is in this period, we have fewer winners. And that is because two Canadians win a whole lot of tournaments between them. And so we start getting more repeat winners, but it's specifically two players who take up five titles. Um, and there's no other repeat winners than those two. It's just those two being incredibly dominant, and to no one's surprise, they will top this list for '06 to '08. I did a ranking a while ago that ranked by era. I had a quite different methodology there, somewhat different methodology there, and I'm even going to call the era the Delto era. This is about two guys. So here's the peaks in this era. And again, I've bolded players that won a championship during this run, right? There are players who won a championship earlier or later. Kamikaze won one earlier, Tezuko won one later, Kana won one later, or two later. There, but it's did you win a championship during this time period? Also, Siphon Delhi, it goes into '09 here. That's because the peak naturally extended there, but it's really including very little of '09. Um, if a peak is primarily '09, like Kazakhs also extends and Pogies, but the tournament that really makes them on this list has to be on '08. Like if you want a championship, it has to be an '08 tournament. Um, so for me, I could have appeared somewhere on the lower half of this list based on my run at the end of '08 and Irvine. Um, but I'm just going to include that in my '09 peak where it fits much better. Uh, so we're doing a little messing around with eras. Meta won a tournament in '06. It was towards the end of '06, and his good period was really '06, '07. So I included him in the '06 to '08 period rather than '03 to '06. You could have said I should have made the cutoff harder, but I think sharing the '06 year let me kind of move things earlier or later depending what fit better. It felt to me right to those eras, fair to those eras. And it also means both these eras have the same number of tournaments you could compete in, which makes it feel fair to compare them overall. Um, okay. You can see Kana is the only player that appears two separate times, though as you can also see from the sheer length of Delial and Seto's runs, they are doing this over a lot of tournaments at a really high level. I could have easily broken them both up into two periods, and they probably would have had the top four slots between them. Or at the very worst, they'd have been like first, second, third, and fifth or sixth, right? Something like that. Um, I gave them the single highest scores I could get them, which puts them first and second, but they easily could have had, two of the top six, right? Each, right? They could have been four of the top six. I probably could have finagled it so where they were like six of the top 10. Um, Delial and Seto were very obviously the best players of the era. Delial becomes the first player to ever win three major tournaments. Seto became the third player to win two after Doc Evil and Cookie. Win percentage stuff, and most of the stuff I do is based on win percentage. Win percentage stuff always prefers Seto. But if you're looking for arguments for Delial, and I think there are very good arguments both ways, Seto almost always wins a higher percentage of games. But during this period, Delial won the heads up with Seto, most importantly, beating him in the Triad Wars 6 finals, but also beating him in another semifinals, I believe. He won the heads up, and he gets the three titles first, even though he started winning titles later. And his period of dominance, like Seto is great '03 to 0, is good '03 to '05, and then great starting early '06. Delhi's great starting at the end of '06. Um, so if you're looking at like total championships or head-to-head record, these things look good for Delhi. If you're looking at kind of overall win percentage adjusted for opposition, Seto tends to look a little better. Either way, they're very clearly the two best players of the era, and I think these are two of the best runs of all time, especially because while I've tried to adjust for length versus dominance of peak, uh, these are kind of these peaks are so good, which is why they go 3, 4 years. And this was when Seto was pretty active, rather than like playing every third tournament. Um, so I think these are incredible runs, and honestly, I think this is underrating how good they were. Um, you can just start looking through the tournament record, and It's possible I could have finagled the numbers to make them look better. I thought I optimized this, but um, yeah, these are just absurd runs. I'll double check it for later lists to see if I can make them look any better. Possibly divide it into like 2 appearances for each, and maybe I can push one a little higher. Um, the thing is, they both did this thing where they'd like win a tournament and then go out round one and then win a tournament or make a finals, right? Not in Delhi's case. Delhi never makes finals. Make a semifinals and then like win again. And so when you take the run, you have to include the round one. So they tend to put up tournaments runs that are hard to split up. And so I ended up using this whole thing and for a run that long. I mean, it's just absurd. Seif's 3 tournament run remains magnificent, one of the all-time great 3 tournament runs. Kana wins an SE Rhinoa in here and is the only player to appear twice on this list. This is probably before Great Sephiroth's peak. He wins his first tournament, Nessie Rhinoa as well. Suikoden. I don't talk much about him, and I don't really, despite overlapping with him a bit, I don't have any sense of him really as a player or a person. But he wins TTAC 5 here, the tournament I go back to least, because if you looked at the bracket in the Shrine, oh, it's painful to try to get the results from and put them into other spreadsheets. Jaws, really underrated tournament winner. We get Turd's first win. We're going to talk a lot about Turds. Um, we get a really nice run from Kazik. He also suffers from, he becomes the second player to get 2 finals. He was known as the 2 finals guy, and everyone was deeply impressed by him. And I think when I was coming up in 08 and very good in 09, I think he was pretty widely considered the best player to never win a tournament. Um, that was the impression I got because of those 2 finals. They were split up enough that I had to give him this really long peak, but the long peak ended up meaning he could hit a lot of really impressive events. Yeah, Kazik, very good. Not my pick for greatest non-winner at any point in time, but certainly very much in that conversation. We also see Yojimbo before he had maybe even made like this is before any finals runs. No, I think he finals the Rhinoa, which Great Sephiroth wins. So he's gotten 1 finals run, but he's going 3-1 or better in every tournament he plays. His win rate is already really high from the very start. There's no bad tournaments I cut at the start. Again, if someone starts like 0-5 and then they start winning, I just cut that part because I don't care about it. I don't think it's meaningful. But it's also worth noting like Yojimbo just wins from the start. We get Pogi, a finalist in another Rhinoa. We get Meta here. Maybe a little underrated on this because his win comes a little early. He also gets a finals, but there's a bunch of tournaments in between, and I couldn't quite cut it up in a way that favored him because you can't skip tournaments in the middle of a peak. I can't not include those. Shadwell, I think, had a really nice run. I always thought of him as the like closed combo level 10 all rules guy, or all real rules, no elemental. But he had some really nice runs. Keith Atkinson, final TTAC 5, just trying to mention players we haven't seen. Kaus has his second really good run. Grat is widely considered one of the best players. If you read the old Occult fans, he's talked about a lot as the player like he's going to break through at some point. I think Homer also seen of in a similar light. Ace comes back and has 1 tournament and makes semifinals, beating a young Nightwish, which is pretty impressive. And before you say, well, how good was Nightwish? Well, Nightwish knocked out Kamikaze in an earlier round, so probably very good. Coops makes a finals. FF Player 7, never all that many wins, but beat some really good players in the wins he did have. Scythe, Tezuka, yeah, a lot of names you'd expect. Nice to see names like Feeling Lucky as well. Yeah. I always shout out Steve as a much better tournament player than his icon count indicates. Yeah, a lot of good players here. Flair. Kazdon was someone I struggled with in our matches back in the day. I remember in 08 really thinking he was just a very tough matchup. And you can see Meta appearing here again. It turned out it looked better for him to separate his 2 deep runs than to keep them together. So those are the best peaks of 06 to 08. One thing to note is 03 to 06 actually had more players with a 2100 performance for their peak run. And that is despite ratings being lower because they hadn't had time to like grow your rating yet. So it should be harder to have 2100 performances because you're going to need higher win rates, right? The lower rated your opponents, the higher win rate you need to have a 2100 performance. So it's actually a case that '03 to '06 had better tournament players. Um, but what we're seeing is more dominance by the very best, right? Doc Evil is incredibly dominant, but plays 3 tournaments. Karmazin's incredibly dominant, but plays 2 tournaments. For the players who played, more than 3 tournaments, it's Cookie, Kamikaze, and Sujiro, right? Those are the three. And I think Deli, Seto, and the kind of early part of Kana and Great Sephiroth's career, Sife's peak, and a lot of like up and coming names, or just very good players like Jaws and Kazik. I think the high end of players here is higher, especially among people with like not flash in the pan careers. But I think it's interesting that fewer players have that 2100 performance. We're seeing more of the results just sucked up by the same names over and over and less split up. I might mention this later in the video. No, I think I mentioned it earlier. We have fewer champions in this period as well, because again, more players are winning more times. And I think one thing that happens as Triple Triad goes from the early days to the later days is the top level gets more dominant. And the top level gets more dominant, not a player just playing, a few tournaments at a time, but just more dominant for long periods of time. And that makes it harder and harder for other players to break through or do something because there are, 6 or 8 names that they're just going to lose to almost all of the time. And so it becomes really hard to have a tournament result that's better than like 2-1 because by round 4, you're probably going to have faced one of them, right? Or by round 3. And I think things do go that direction. I do think Triple Triad in general gets stronger over time. There might be a point where we stop seeing that, but in general, I think quality of play improves and has improved. I really wish I had game records from back in the day. I'm sure there were many very good games, but I'm also sure we'd be able to identify some differences. And yeah, but I do think it's interesting that '03 to '06 had this more varied field. You see a lot more different winners. You see a lot more different finalists too. I probably should have checked the finals count, but I think you see way more like, okay, Ulti repeated finals, Kazik repeated finals, but the names you saw in the finals are often names you'd never see again. And generally speaking, at this point, if you see someone's name in the finals, you're probably seeing them in a whole bunch of other tournaments making fairly deep runs. And I think that's just not very true of the '03 '06 period, uh, which I think is really interesting. Uh, a little more Wild West in a way. Yeah. And I think both things have a lot to endear themselves if you're looking at like tournament history and looking for interesting things. Here is the all-time leaderboard combining '03 through '08. So using all the periods we did. So you can see some '03 and some '04 stuff making it. Again, I think Cookie's '04 is a bit underrated here because the ratings were lower. I think Doc Evil's '04 '05 is a bit underrated here. Though at this point, it's so hard to beat Doc Evil's 18-1, and we will look at his opposition a little later in this video, and it is insane. I think there is a very clear top 3 of all time at this point. I think any top 3 that isn't Seto, Deli, and Doc Evil, and you could put them in any order, is just wrong. I think after that, there's some argument. Like, I would not have Scythe 4th all time, despite his run at the end of 2008 and start of 2009 being like the clear best 3 tournament run outside of those 3 players. And he has some nice results before that as well. He has some 2-1s, 3-1s. But I think that's the best 3 tournament run anyone's had outside of those 3. But overall, I would put him behind the Kamikazes of the world. Yeah, so this is the combined list. I think it's a pretty good ranking. Again, you could argue Doc Evil first or second, and I would be completely fine with that. You could move Deli up a slot. I'd be fine with that. You could move Scythe down a few slots. I'd be fine with that. But I'm a big Scythe fan, so it's fun to see him up there. Maybe Great Sephiroth doesn't quite deserve to be that high yet. His next couple years will certainly help put him there, but maybe not quite yet. I think this is a pretty good list. Again, the earlier it is, the more you should give it a little boost because ratings hadn't separated yet. But overall, I like this list quite a lot. Worth celebrating that Cookie appears twice on it, and one of them's an 04. The only player, I believe, to appear twice here, unless I missed someone when looking this over. Um, yeah, I think this is a pretty good list. I then, just to have more lists, I took the players who were either completely done playing tournament games, or if they did, it was very few after this, and it was not something that, like, Bren plays a little bit after this. Very irrelevant results to his actual career. So I counted these as the retired players, and here is my ranking of retired players at this point in time at the end of 08. Like Homer will play a tournament or two after. Not very meaningful. Um, why did I underline people? What was I signifying? Bold is tournament winners. Underlined, I think, is people who have made the list since 06. Yeah, the people who aren't underlined are all, I made this list a few days ago and forgot what I was doing. Um, the non-underlined people were all already on the list by the end of 06, and the underlined people are people who played a bit 06 through 08 and are new additions to the list. Yeah, that seems right to me. I also think this is a pretty good list. I'd probably move Ulti up to third. You can definitely quibble, especially, but when people are separated by 10 rating, of course you can switch their slots. Um, I've always been impressed by the very little I've seen of like Ace and Bryce's record. Big Dream Virus fan. Yeah. These are the career stats, not the highest peaks. This is their whole career to this point, excluding like if they lost a bunch at the start or if they lost a bunch at the end. I'm trying to be as positive towards the core of their career as possible. And here are the active players moving forward. We're entering 2009. We're in the exciting new year of 2009. Who do you think are the best players around? And of players who are going to continue to play. Why did I include Bren on both lists? That was a mistake. Bren is basically retired. I should not have included Bren probably on this list. Don't know why I included him on both. Mistakes were made. But I think Deli and Seto, everyone knew coming into 09, were the best two players. But it's really interesting that Yojimbo is already that high. Slash of Time is already a tournament winner in that high. I'm an up and coming player at this point that I think is quite promising. Nightwish and MC. Nightwish has made it further in a tournament than MC, but actually MC got through really tough opposition in his games, like playing against Turds at the start of Vincent. And once you adjust for his opposition, this actually thinks MC is the more promising player. Nightwish will go on to have a better 2009, so you can say it was just flatly wrong. But interesting to think about. A bunch of fun players, like you see some up-and-comers like Piggyman, Fee, FRM. Fee and FRM end up not competing much after this, but Piggy becomes great. You see players who were great but have dropped off, like Yevon, who will have some comebacks, but not for a while. Demonic is obviously another really important up-and-comer who ends up being a champion. And you see some long-time very good players like Grat and Gambit. Tezuka is mostly stopping playing at this point, but at a really nice early run. Same with D. But they'll come back in a few years. Jadat's mostly at the tail end of his initial great run. Cool spots kind of in the midst of his pretty good run. Yeah, it's just sort of interesting to go back to 08 and think, okay, coming into 09, who should we have thought are the best? And I think that top four is right. And if you notice, like, who are the new players? Yojimbo was up, or Yojimbo Slash of Time was up. Demonic, MC Nightwish. That's and then Piggyman sort of in the pack, but he'll separate himself soon. That's a pretty good like top six of who are the most promising players. I mean, those are basically the ones that are gonna break through very soon. I guess Slash already has. But Did a pretty good job picking them out at the end of '08. Um, yeah. So what else do I got for you? I want to talk about turds. So the initial inspiration of this ranking was to discuss turds. So we're going to look into the future, but only turds as numbers. Haven't checked anyone else's, don't have them. This is not very well automated. I have to do some copy pasting to move stuff about and getting the numbers in. And it's slight pain to do, people, but I just wanted to look at turds because Turds wins the Vincent in '08, but as you can see from these lists, I think the Vincent win itself is a really nice win, especially because it's 7 rounds. But his surrounding results are not great, and he will tell you that. If you look at who he actually lost to in the surrounding tournaments, it's usually someone pretty good. But it's one of the weaker title runs of the era if you look at it along with the surrounding results. And if we go back to one of those lists, Turds was of players in the 06-08 era, one of the maybe I think the second lowest win ranked. So he's got a title. I think he has a really nice run in Vincent, but he's not an all-time great player yet. And the question is like, okay, you could say any winner is, but if we say all-time great is some better category than being a winner, right? If you say all-time great is like, looking at top 10 or looking maybe at this point, like after 03, 06, I'd say there are 5 all-time greats that we've talked about. And now, Delial and Seto are obviously also all-time greats. And Kana and Great Sephiroth are looking like they might break in. You might think Scythe has broken in. Probably hasn't, but he's going to be somewhere in that conversation. Turds is not there, right? Turds right now looks like a lower end winner of the 06 to '08 era. And it's hard to compare him to some of the 03, 06 guys. I think a lot of the early 03, 06 winners I would have Turds definitely ahead of, as with these lists. But some of them I'd certainly have ahead of Turds. And, like Cookie's wins, I think, are a little better than Turds' win once you adjust for like ratings are lower earlier, as an example. Um, so, mid to lower tier winner at this point, I think. But let's start looking into the future. Let's start thinking about where he's going to go. Turds has 5 peaks, arguably. In '08, he has his first peak. And he wins Vincent, and his 3 best wins around this time are Kazik, Kaus Debonair, and Ace. 3 really good players. No all-time greats, no tournament winners, but 3 really good players. His second peak is the one where I think he starts looking, and I might have this in a later slide, but I think it becomes clear he's like at least a mid-tier winner because he starts racking up other icons and other real runs. He gets 2 more semifinals. He has 3 4-1s. One of them's only a quarterfinal because it's a 7-rounder, but he gets 3 4-1s in a pretty short period of time. And he beats Deli twice in what is arguably, like, I always say Deli Seto is the greatest rivalry of all time. I think myself and Yojimbo is also in the conversation. But the other one to fill out the top 3 is probably at this point Deli all Turds, where Deli has the edge, but it's pretty close. I think Deli's up 6-4. They've also met in more finals than like any 2 other players have met by a lot. Talked about this in the last videos. But he beats Deli twice here. He beats Kana. These are fantastic wins. Like these are better wins, right? He's beating better players and he's making more consistent deep runs. He doesn't get a title here. The peak here ranks it at 2202, which is a little weaker. But this is a run that for me really moves him from this is a winner, but like not clear it's better than the unfixables of the world. Or, the one-timers that didn't make a lasting impact, at least on the tournament scene. I can't speak to other scenes. Unfixable, Firebrand. Broccoli later comes back and really does make a new impression, but at this point, Broccoli is in that kind of category. And I think it's not clear Turds isn't like Turds looks like he's in that group after his win, or looks like he could be. And he has some, early exits after that. But then he has this 09-10 run. Really good. His third peak is 2015 to 17, and this is when he gets his second title. I know Carver ended in 2021, but I counted it as a 2017 tournament. Most of the tournament happened before the site went down. You can see his best wins are Smokes, Fialva, Yevon. Um, all players I actually really enjoy. I think they're all really like fascinating players, but you can see the overall peak here. The end of the site was not the strongest period, and this is he gets his second title. He joins the two-time club. I don't think this changes how I look at him. Right, this title to me is not a big mover. He beats Vialva in the finals. Other than that, he basically beats beginners. Um, Vialva played really well in that finals, should say. And also, again, Vialva and Yevon are two of the most creative players on the site, for sure. And Smokes is, I think, one of the people with the best, just like core understanding of Triple Triad. But like, this is a weaker field. Uh, and yeah, his runs around this time. He gets his second title. For me, this one doesn't change my opinion of Turds. What does change my opinion of Turds? I would still put him in the same group I'd put him after the second peak. Um, what does change my opinion is what he's done between 2022 and 2025. So in peak 4, which has an asterisk because one of these is Cosmos, um, which is closed. Right, he did win Cosmos. Wait, let me double check. I am so sorry if I am ruining the video. That's... Nope, I can't. Oh no, I do it. No, yeah. Okay, sorry about that. In this run, he beats a lot of huge names. You can choose who you want for the third best win of that period. He also makes the finals of Triad Wars 15. I I think it's Cosmos, not Kefka. I think, yeah. Now I'm blanking. If it's Cosmos, then it is basically it's a closed random tournament and probably shouldn't have the same ratings included because he's getting credit for beating top players, but of course you are more likely to beat those top players in closed, generally speaking, because they're really hard to beat in open. But also they are not as strong in closed because no one is as strong in closed. You cannot have as high win rates long term in closed as you can in open, because in open, if you are better, you can win a higher percentage of the time. Closed is more variance. Um, and so you shouldn't get credit for beating as highly rated players. So the peak 4 score is probably not right, but he does get another title here against really good opposition. I don't remember which wins here are from which tournament event, so apologies for that. I screwed up on this part. But this run starts looking much more dominant, like higher win percentages around the run, and also beating really top people. And then the peak 5 run, you can look at the list of players he beat. That's just like top tier, absolutely top tier. And he gets two open titles in a row, and a tournament later, or two tournaments later, makes another finals. These are basically the last three open tournaments that have happened, and or primarily open. Okay, TTAC varies, but these are the last three primarily open hand tournaments that have happened. And he finals all of them and wins two and beats really good opponents. And if you include Kefka, which I did for the peak 5 peak, the one with the asterisk, that adds a win against Seto, which just massively bumps up everything because that's another enormous win to add to it. And if we consider closed tournaments, which I'm not doing directly, then I should note Turds reached 4 straight finals and tournaments, which ties the all-time record with Yojimbo. Only I believe Turds and Yojimbo have done that. 4 straight finals in any tournament format. So this final peak, you can cut it different ways. I haven't yet decided what tournaments I'm including. Am I keeping it kind of more pure open? I do include TTAC, but more pure open, Or should I be including the open random stuff? Probably. And should I be including closed tournaments? Probably not, because I think they're a somewhat different category, and because the ratings I have for players that we're using to measure how well you did, like, they don't directly translate. And all the high ratings should be lower because, again, no one can have that high win percentage in closed. There's just too much randomness. So I do think, specifically in closed random, or in closed hand games if it's not some lame rule set. Um, but my point here is, and I guess I'll probably make it in the next slide, but you can look at like peak 1 through peak 3 and conclude, as I concluded in a lot of rankings, Turds is a mid-tier tournament winner. And what he has done in the last few years has been really special and puts him in a really interesting place in Triple Triad history. How long have I been going? Have I been talking too long? Do I need to? Yeah, I have. Okay, so let's close this up. Um, I was gonna compare to Doc Evil because I noted that Turds' peak 4 was the exact same score as Doc Evil's run. I would note, oh my god, look at Doc Evil's competition. Like, I think Turds' competition is better. Like, I think those are better players. But if you are going in 0506, Kamikaze and Sujiro are basically the two best players you can face. Ulti is the only two-time finalist other than Doc Evil himself. And soon Sujiro. Sujiro gets a second finals soon. Mafi Josie, I'm always saying, is one of the most, like, maybe the best player to never make a finals. Like, gotta be in that conversation, if not just the pick. C17 gets a lot of hype as a great player. I saw him play a little in 2009. He looked good. Grat, Dream Virus, Biddy Sphere are all really good. Like, it's really hard to come up with actually a harder tournament run at the time than who Doc Evil beat. His 18-1 is not like he had scrubs. He was facing really good players. Um, so I was gonna compare these, but yeah, Doc Evil's run is insane. And the adjustment I'm making to calculate the elo here, I think is basically really good and useful for everyone but Doc Evil, who it's gonna underrate. And so I don't mean to disrespect Doc Evil with my ratings of him here. You look at this run and it's just like he played so many of the best players, right? That's how many wins is that? I listed 9 wins out of his 18. 9 of his wins were against players of this caliber. And I think there were some pretty good players I didn't list as well. Like, that's nuts. That's really good. So anyway, this slide is mostly to celebrate Doc Evil, but the other thing is basically Turds now has this kind of 4-year run, where if we start putting it together, it's not a ton of games, but it is a lot. Where if we start combining it into one run, we start getting 2,300 plus scores over a now 3-4 year run, and that includes some early exits. He's got some like 1-1 exits, but that's a really special run. So yeah, here I sort of went down. I think in 2008 he becomes a champion. 2009-10 he becomes a mid-tier champion. 2015-17 he becomes a two-time champion, but my evaluation of his place in history does not move. Yours might, right? But mine doesn't. In 2023 to 25 he adds 3 more tournaments. And to me, more importantly, he puts up a peak run that's, I mean, we'll see how runs look over time. Right? Ratings do tend to go up slightly. So we're comparing him 17 years later, 15 to 17 years later, from these 2006 to 8 runs. Actually, 15 to 19 years later, depending on your start and end date within those runs. Like, ratings are going to be somewhat higher now. I'm not sure how much higher, we will see as we continue doing this. But, you know, Seto broke 2,300. Delhi was close. Probably, I think, harder to do so then, just given the opposition was lower rated. But Turds has put up a run that, aside Delhi, Seto, and Doc, I think if we stick this back in 2008, we would all agree this is one of the four best runs, along with those three. Um, and if you combine that with me telling you this guy won 5 championships, you start to get really high in the all-time rankings. So his slate of accomplishments, turds, we've talked about this, is top 5 all time. He has 5 rings. This is tied 4th, 5th all time. You look at most icons, most semis, most finals. He's top 5 across the board. The question is, does he have a peak to match that? And I think the answer we're getting is he didn't, but now he does. And that's been really cool to see. And I think he really has played fantastically. And I haven't really talked to him about, but he has said, I mean, I talked to him a bunch, but like he has said within the last couple of years that he thought he was playing better than he'd ever played. And if you look at both his win rate has increased. He's been for a long time a career low 60%. It's up to 64, 65 now from around 61 maybe at the start of the return. His win rate has increased as he is facing tougher and tougher opposition. And that's really cool. So that's the end of part 2 of this ranking. That's 06 to 08 with an added focus on turds just because he's an interesting player to discuss. Thing is, of course, Delhi also just won a tournament, but there's not much to discuss with Delhi. He's the winningest player ever. He continues to be the winningest player ever. It's the players that are moving in the all-time rankings that are a little more interesting to focus on when doing stats posts. And again, I am curious. Obviously you don't want to include turds as later results yet, but through 08, who would be your top 10 of all time? For me, I think I probably still have Doc Evil number 1. But I'm really not sure. There have been lots of times where right now I'm feeling really high on Doc. Lots of times I feel like Deli and Seto both clearly passed him at this point. I don't know. And I don't know how I'd order Seto and Deli right now from this period. Deli has the 3 championships in the head-to-head. Seto has the higher win rate. I'm kind of a win rate guy at heart, but it's really close. So I think those 3 are the top 3. I think any other top 3 is ridiculous. Order those however you want. I think like Kana and Great Sephiroth look really good, but it's hard to imagine they've already. I mean, their numbers are better, but like Kano wins a fairly short tournament in Rhinoa, but the surrounding results are so good. Loses the title match to Seto, but like losing to Seto, how much can you blame someone for? I'd probably have Kamikaze, Sujiro, and Cookie still 4th through 6th. And then I think I'd have. Oh, Sife's up there now. Maybe Sife 7th. Trying to do this off the top of my head now. I think I probably already have Kana and Great Sephiroth 8th and 9th. They each now have a title win in Rhinoa, and their surrounding results are so consistently good. They're just more consistently in the late rounds than anyone we've ever seen except Deli and Seto. Like, more so than Kamikaze and Sujiro were. So I'd probably put them 8th and 9th at this point, though they have a case for higher already. And then who's 10th? I really want to say like Ulti or something. Let's go back for a sec. Let's see if my list was reasonable. All right, Docs, Deli, Seto in some order. Kazi, Sujiro, Cookie, 4th through 6th. Oh, Karmazin should be there. Yeah, Karmazin is the person I was missing. Yeah, Karmazin's top 10 at this point. That would be my top 10. Yeah, somewhere we can fiddle with the order, but there's like Seto, Deli, Doc, top 3. Cookie, Sujiro, Kazi, 4 through 6. Scythe, Kana, Great Sephiroth, 7 through 9. And then Karmazin 10. Oh, I feel good about that list. And what I like is I like when it's tiered like that, because then it's fun to argue within the tiers. But I actually feel really good about that list. If you came up with a list while doing this, I hope it looks at least somewhat similar to that. Um, Actually, the problem with that list is I really think it's just the correct top 10. Sometimes like there's a lot of fun debating the 10th slot, and if you're like really high on like meta or ulti or turds or Virgil. Virgil actually would be a probably the pick for a person to sneak in. Or Bren actually. He's the person who had the championship followed by the best results around it of anyone else. Um or Beastay, the one person to beat Doc Evil. If you're really high on them, but I think that 10 is just correct. Maybe you could say one of Kana, Cypher, Great Sephiroth hasn't quite proved it yet, but I'm not sure their runs are so much shorter or less impressive at this point than people you would be including. Yeah, I think that top 10's just right. Well, that's fun. All right, well, I'm glad we ended there. That is the top 10 so far. Um, Turds is not top 10 at this point in time, and he will get further from the top 10 for the next 14 years, and then he will make a really aggressive charge at it, and we're probably going to conclude he's there in the end. But I feel really good about that top 10 at this point in time. Let's end here.